Welcome back to the Garden State Law Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Lau. Joining me today is Sabre estate planning attorney Mary Joan Kennedy. Mary Joan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Tim.
So today, Mary Joan and I will be discussing the importance of having an estate plan. This is something I feel very comfortable talking to you about because you handled some of my estate plan. So hopefully I have the right questions for you and that I have enough experience in this to lead a conversation. But you did a great job working with me, so you come highly recommended.
Thank you.
Before we jump into our topic, why don't you take a second and tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice?
Sure, Tim. So, Mary Joan Kennedy, I've been practicing in estate planning and estate administration for more than 15 years, I'd say. I really enjoy this practice because attorneys sometimes are called counselors, and I like counseling and talking to people and dealing with families, and at the end of the day, I feel like I helped people.
Yeah, and it's one of the more sensitive areas that you can work with. So you're working with people very closely, and it's you're building a bit of a relationship. I
That's
think
right.
More than some other attorneys may in their line of practice.
That's right.
And you also handle elder law too. Is that correct?
I do a little bit of my practice is elder law. I'd say maybe 15%.
Great. So we're going to talk about estate planning. This was a topic that when I first invited you onto the show, you thought, is this really interesting enough for a podcast? Which I thought was interesting because it's not so much whether or not, in my opinion, if it's interesting, but I think it's really important, and it's something that a lot of people overlook. You know, we stress to, especially young people, professionals, that you want to plan for, long-term planning. And, people are stressing so often that you should be saving for your 401k and that you should be saving for your retirement. But there's this other component of your life and getting your affairs in order that I think is overlooked often. So we can debate whether or not estate planning is interesting, but I think we can both agree that it is very important. It's something that a lot of people tend to kind of put in the back burner, and then it becomes important when it becomes important, and that's very often too late. So
I think that's absolutely right. I think it's one of those things that as adults and maybe even college students, we know this is something we should do, but it's something very easy to put off as we get into the daily grind of the day-to-day. Right. But I do think it's part of everybody's planning and is important.
Yeah. So let's talk about estate planning.
Okay.
I think most people think, wills, right? Is that what we're talking about? We're talking about wills, but there's more to it than just wills, right?
Absolutely.
So what are the main kind of components that we should be aware of when thinking about putting together an estate plan?
So I think you touched on it, that you're absolutely right. Some people use wills and estate plan interchangeably, and it isn't really. So estate planning, at least from my point of view, is a comprehensive review of where you're at and where you want to be. Mm-hmm. So the components of an estate plan and conversation I have with my clients is, where are you now? What do you want to do now while you're living? So planning for while everything is fine. Mm-hmm. Then planning for the future through something like a will or perhaps a trust agreement. Mm-hmm. And then after you pass away, what's going to happen with your assets and your estate? How is it going to be disposed of?
Sure. So before we get into each component, who are the candidates for estate plan? So, I mean, I had this conversation with you specifically because I think at the time when we first met, I believe I had both of my children. Mm-hmm. I was married. I owned a home. And I still was a little like, I think I need this. I know I have kids, but I don't know. I don't think people realize when they should not plan for these things. So who are the candidates? Who should be considering estate plan?
So again, if we're going to think of estate plan comprehensively, I think every adult, every person over the age of 18 is a candidate for an estate plan. Mm-hmm. Now, the complexity of that estate plan will vary greatly based on the person, but even a college student is ripe for coming to have a conversation with an estate planning attorney because they might need just an advance directive and a power of attorney, which I know we'll get into later, but I would say every single adult is ripe for an estate plan.
And I feel like there are probably some milestones too, where you're like, okay, I didn't do it in college. That would have been great. I didn't.
Right.
But there are some, I can imagine a few. I'll let you touch upon them. But what are some things that, all right, this happens in your life, you really should be thinking about, like getting your affairs in order?
Yeah, so of course, when you're getting married, I think that's an important thing. And of course, getting married, you're in the thick of it, as we say, and it's a very busy time. But I think that's a very important time to think about at least your estate plan, and maybe that's something you want to address in the first year after you're married, because you want your spouse to be your fiduciary, I would suspect and expect most people would want their spouse instead of their parents, right? Another time is when you have children. And
can I interrupt real quick?
Yes, sure.
So before you're married, if you don't have an estate plan, we might get into a complicated area.
Yeah, we're in a sticky place there, and that's why the college students need them, because there are laws that you would expect that as a mother or a parent that you have control and say over your adult child. No, you may not. So that's why we'll get into it later. But so
marriage one.
Marriage one, and then of course when you have a child, because you want to name someone to be guardian of your child if God forbid something happened to the two of you.
Okay.
Then I would say every 5 to 10 years you need to reevaluate whether or not you have a milestone in your life. Anything happens, divorce, death, separation, change in financial circumstances. You certainly want to reevaluate. And I think touching on this, that's why it's very important to start early with an estate planning attorney, because you want to develop that relationship of somebody that you can touch base with and say, this happened, do we need to reevaluate where we are? Then again, as you approach retirement, I think you need to start thinking about long-term care planning and elder care planning. And then, of course, when you pass away, there's going to be need for an estate administration attorney.
Sure. I can think of one other thing as well, because we went through it.
Okay.
I remember when the pandemic happened, it seemed like everybody was clamoring for an estate plan.
Right.
Which I guess really points to you never really know what can happen in a dramatic fashion in your life that will lead you to need something like this. Right. So get it done while you can get it done. Don't wait until the last moment.
Right.
Because I remember specifically with you and our firm and other people, not people in my life as well as the attorneys that I work with in my life, was, oh, wow, I need to get that. We don't know how bad this is going to get. We need to get an estate plan together ASAP.
That's true. And back then, everything was feeling emergent and rushed and stressed, and that's what we want to avoid.
Yeah, exactly. So let's jump into the components of it. So the first component being, while you're alive, and the early stages, and these are advanced directives and power of attorney. I still don't totally have my mind wrapped around each of those. Okay. So what is a power of attorney? I think I have a general understanding of what they are. But if you can spell out, what are these things?
Sure. So a power of attorney is a document by which you appoint someone to be your agent who will handle legal and financial matters for you. So it can be limited where, for example, perhaps when you bought a house, you appointed the attorney who is handling the closing for you to sign papers on your behalf. That's a limited power of attorney. It's for a specific purpose and it has a specific time frame before it expires. Or a general power of attorney, which is all-encompassing, right? Anything legal and financial, this person, this agent can handle, step into your shoes and do for you. Sign beneficiary designations, close bank accounts, withdraw money from your account, write checks, enter into contracts. I mean, it can be as broad in scope as the statute allows in the state in which you reside.
So let me ask you a question. So,
yeah.
Is a power of attorney something that you generally recommend for someone in their 20s or 30s? If you, for example, you got married,
right.
Is that necessary or recommended? When I hear power of attorney, I usually think someone's is much older, maybe coming to their end of their life. They can't really make the decisions on their own, so they'd appoint their child or their spouse or whoever to be the power of attorney. Is this something that people who are, 20s,
healthy
30s, 40s, healthy
right.
and young. You have better terms for it than me. Should they be thinking about that?
I think everybody should be thinking about that. Yeah, absolutely. Even college students, like I said, because you want to choose someone that you trust because you are giving them, in most cases, broad access to your assets, right? But you don't want a situation where there's an emergency and no one can pay your bills, get to your bank account, access your digital assets, for example.
Yeah. Now, under 18, you're in college, you're still 17, it defaults to your parents.
Right,
is that right?
Right.
Okay. So
because under 18, you can't sign a contract.
Right. So basically, that's first milestone, like you mentioned before,
right.
is 18 years old. A lot of people are going to college first time. So the other aspect is advanced directives.
Right,
correct?
advanced directives for healthcare. And what I do is what's called a combination advanced directive for healthcare. It includes two parts. A living will, which most people would be familiar with, where you say what you want to happen at your end of life. So if you were terminal or otherwise in a very serious medical condition, do you want the doctors to take all means necessary to keep you alive, feeding and fluid through tubes, et cetera? Do you want to donate your organs if they're viable? Do you want to donate your organs for research or just to another human being? And the second part of the advanced directive is where you appoint somebody as your healthcare representative. So that's the person that can talk to your doctors and make decisions for you if you can't speak for yourself. So that's an important point that I mention to people, that this is only if you can't communicate to the doctors yourself will someone else be making decisions for you.
Yeah.
So that document I absolutely recommend for everyone that's over the age of 18 going to college. Around this time of year, I bring it up to everyone because HIPAA laws, which people might be familiar with, are privacy laws in the healthcare area that prevent parents from speaking. So if you are at college, you end up in the infirmary or the hospital, the doctor should not really talk to any other adult about your care without an advance directive being signed.
Yeah. And I suppose this is going to be a theme throughout much of what we talk about, but these are all, as we call, like living, breathing documents, right? Once, at any point in time, if you want to change any component of any part of your estate plan, it's easy enough to change, right? We're not starting from scratch. If you want to change what a beneficiary or a designee or whatever it might be, that's an easy enough to call it, or I call you, Mary Joan,
Absolutely.
I have a quick change. It's not like I'm starting over the whole process again.
Absolutely. And that's why sometimes my clients get stuck on, I'm not sure if this is the right person. And I say, just do your best now. And if you call me tomorrow and say, I want to not name Jane, I want to name Joe, that's an easy change.
Yeah. And it's not a big expense. It's not time.
No, because the document is already drafted, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect. See, I try to seem lawyers like lawyers aren't that expensive.
That's right.
Sometimes they are, but not certainly not.
And hopefully as we talk, I'll show that it's more expensive in this area to not have a lawyer.
Sure.
And I really do believe that. I'm very conscious of price. Most of my clients are, regular people that have a budget, and I'm not looking to exploit anyone. I just really feel strongly that you will save money by hiring a professional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So component number 2, estate plan, I'm calling them components,
Yeah.
However we want to look at it, but we're looking at a will and a trust, is that right? Or that's...
Will or maybe a trust, yeah.
So what is the difference between a will and a trust?
Right. So a trust is a document that you could use, again, many different ways, but it's an agreement, a contract where you appoint someone to take what's the legal term is nominal ownership, but ownership over certain assets and manage them on your behalf. So it's a written agreement and you set forth. There are beneficiaries of the trust, and that's who the trustee, the person is called, is managing the assets for. A will, on the other hand, is a document where you say where you want your assets to go upon your passing.
Okay.
So it really has no active effect until you pass away.
Yeah. So I feel like the will is probably one of the most common things you're working with.
Right.
Someone says to you, that's great, I would love a will. I have nothing to give away right now. I don't have a whole lot. What do you say to those people who feel as if it doesn't make a whole lot of sense right now because I haven't acquired much over the years?
Yeah, and that could happen, I suppose, that somebody calls me and I will say, you know what, you don't need a will. We're fine just doing an advance directive and a power of attorney, and right now you have a beneficiary designation on your one checking account and you own your house with your wife, and you're fine. I'm not going to oversell anyone on a document or a product that they don't need, right? But most people, especially in the tri-state area, will need a will because our lives are a little bit more complicated than that, especially, as you grow your family and have other people that you want to pass assets on to.
Yeah. Now, if some of your assets are securities or other, pieces of complicated financial vehicles, are these incorporated will? Should you be bringing in a financial advisor if things become a little bit more complicated? How does the financial advisor component and the lawyer, how do they work together, and how do you designate one from the other?
That's a great point. And often we work as a team. If a person has a trusted financial advisor, we absolutely get them on board and say, what have you been talking about with these clients? I want to hear what the goals they've expressed to you. I want to make sure we're all working together. But a point that I don't want to miss is with the will, you're appointing someone as your executor. Now that alone is a cost-saving method, and I know we're going to get into this later about why do I need a lawyer, but if you do not have a will, your assets will pass by what's called intestacy law, and that means according to the statute. So you are no longer making decisions for yourself. The New Jersey statute, if you reside in New Jersey, is making decisions about how your assets pass. But that means that an administrator will have to be appointed for you, and you need to go to the surrogate and post a surety bond. The cost of a surety bond is not inexpensive. So that's a very important consideration for people when they say, I don't have a lot, do I really need a will? And sometimes, most often, I'll say, you need a will just so that you don't have to go the administration intestacy route.
Yeah. It's an insurance policy.
It's exactly right.
We're really just saying I'm protecting myself for what may happen. And I'm going to end up spending, should something happen, I'm spending the money anyway.
Right. And I think the truth is, like an insurance policy, you're doing it for your loved ones, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to help you at all.
Sure, no.
The advance directive and the power of attorney is helping you.
Yeah.
But as we said, that the will and doing these things are like an insurance policy that help your loved ones.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you think of an estate plan, you're thinking it's about you.
Right.
And it's protecting you, but in all fairness, you're protecting the ones around you.
Right.
Because they have to deal with the fallout of what may or may not, what may have happened.
Right.
So to have things in order, you're really kind of helping your family along through the process.
Absolutely.
So other components of a will, you actually mentioned, and I remember you wrote an article about this a few years ago about digital assets.
Right.
And, this could be anything from, and this was before I think cryptocurrency really became a big thing, but we're talking about, someone has a collection of thousands of, songs on iTunes,
right.
or a robust account in, I forget. I'm not really thinking about what the websites that hold all the pictures or whatever it might be. There's a ton of digital assets. That's something that people should be considering as well, I believe.
Absolutely. I mean, right now everybody has some sort of a digital footprint.
Yeah.
And the reality is, whether it's your online banking account or your iTunes account or your Amazon photos or your Apple ID, without planning for how that's going to be handled if you're incapacitated or if you pass away, your loved ones will be left with a mess.
Yeah.
The reality is, for example, the Apple ID, you need to get a court order if you haven't given someone the authority to handle those after your passing.
Yeah.
So it's an important topic.
And it's probably not just the Apple ID. There's probably 6 other versions of the Apple ID.
I expect so.
Yeah. Okay, so what about someone who is looking to be more charitable with, their end of life distribution? Is that something that is also incorporated in a will or a trust, or if someone's trying to it's not going to a person, I'd like to give it to, I was very involved with the Boys and Girls Club in my local town. Is that something I need to work with them, or how does someone go about dealing with more of a charitable contribution?
Absolutely. And I guess it depends on whether they want that to happen at their passing and how they want the money to go, meaning immediately upon death, you want to leave them a specific amount, or are you leaving the percentage? And again, that's sort of one of the reasons why you want to get a professional to help you and guide you. But that's something you would name in a will or a trust if you go that route.
Okay. So anything else about a will or a trust before we move on to the probate side that you think is worth mentioning that I may have missed?
I think that's good for this content.
Yeah. So the final piece is probate, and I believe that's what we're talking about.
Right.
Is once you've passed, or once someone has passed, what happens after that?
Right.
I've never been very certain about how any of this process works. I never really went through it myself, thankfully. what is probate and how does the whole process work?
Yeah, so a lot of times you'll hear, if you listen to news programs or you read articles, one thing you want to avoid is probate, and they make probate sound like this horrible, scary thing. At least in New Jersey, probate is not at all a complicated or scary thing. What happens is there's a surrogate in each county. When you pass away, if there is a will, you present the will to the surrogate's office, the surrogate court, and there is a surrogate. That's a person who is designated for that county. They accept the will and they appoint the person who's named in the will as the executor. So it's a very simple process. It runs very quickly, costs a couple $100 depending on the number of pages of the will.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so not as bad as it sounds, at least in the state of New Jersey.
Right.
That's the big takeaway.
Right, that's exactly right.
Great.
And then I also want to mention there might be something called a tangible personal property memo that is sort of an annex to the will, where people say, I want my this collection or my china or my doilies or my, whatever, my special things to go to particular people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I failed to mention earlier was, and this was a question I actually had, I remember, you get a set of documents. You have the physical documents. They're signed. We're done. Am I keeping these? Am I putting this in a safe deposit box? Do I need to alert people to where they are? Do you store them? Where do these documents, where do the physical, tangible documents go?
Right. So that's a client decision, and you can either keep them if you have a safe, fireproof, waterproof place, like a safe deposit box or a fire box in your house. That's totally fine. At our firm, we also have a place where we can store them, and then we give you what we call a conformed copy, which says the original is in the vault at our law firm. As far as notifying people, again, that's a personal decision. I always suggest that you do. Some people feel their privacy is important to them and would rather choose to leave a note in some accessible place that says, this is where you can find my documents, but don't want to address that up front.
Sure.
So whichever way the client's comfortable.
Okay. So really at the end of the day, what we're talking about is these documents serve as an insurance policy for you.
Right.
They're protecting your loved one, not just you, but your loved ones as well. And at the end of the day, these expenses are going to get paid one way or another. So might as well do it the right way and have things kind of planned the way you want and planned by conferring with your loved ones and having everything kind of established kind of upfront.
I think that's absolutely right.
All right, nailed it. Great.
I think that's absolutely right. You're going to save time, money, and angst if you hire a professional and get this thing done.
Yeah. So some of the challenges I would imagine you face, and the things that I've actually heard from family and from friends is, I just crossed 40. A lot of people in my position are thinking about this, if they haven't taken care of it already. But I think a lot of people don't want to face the worst case scenario. Really, by walking through this process, you are talking about very difficult aspects of what could happen.
Right.
What is your advice to those who, they don't want to confront these types of things and they're honestly not too concerned about the expense or the, going through it, but they don't want to face, it's very emotional. What do you say to clients who, you're kind of conferring with and meeting or potential clients that are really apprehensive about going through the process?
I think you're absolutely right. I think many people are apprehensive, but unfortunately, this is just one of the things as an adult that we need to do.
Yeah.
I try my best to empathize and guide them, and we take it as slow as they want to. But I say you'll feel so much better once this task is off your list and you know that things are going to be handled the way you want.
Yeah. It's almost like sometimes, at least how I operate, you're lying in bed at night and you're thinking about all the things and I just want to if I could just get it down on paper real quick, I could take the load off of my mind. I know it's done. I know what needs to be handled. I know it's planned, and it could kind of, I know it's reassuring to know that I have some sort of plan ahead of me.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people are also apprehensive about hiring an attorney. You hear attorney, you think this is going to cost money. And I know for a fact, I believe there's probably things you can grab off the internet and trying to do this on your own. Why is it important to hire a professional as opposed to going on this trip on your own?
This is something that comes up all the time, especially in conversation, just, when I'm out somewhere and friends and family even ask this. Kiplinger actually addressed it once at one of their 20 tough questions, like, do you save for retirement or save for your children's college? Do you hire an attorney or just download a form off the internet? And I guess the truth is, and I'm as aware as anyone else, you can go on YouTube, you can go online and get a form. There's absolutely, you can do this on your own. I'm not denying that. But similarly, I could go on YouTube and find out how to install my new sink.
Sure.
I'm not going to do it, right?
Right,
Because the risk is
Yeah.
greater than the reward.
Yeah.
I would not even venture to do that.
Right.
But it's true that you can go online and learn how to do anything in theory.
Yeah.
And can some people, but I think the better choice is to consult with an estate planning attorney
Yeah.
and choose an attorney who is willing to structure your estate plan to your circumstances, isn't looking to give you more than you need, right? And is willing to tailor the products and the plan to you.
Yeah.
Because I think the peace of mind that comes from having that relationship and knowing things were done correctly and knowing that you have someone that if the law changes is going to call you up or send an email or send
Right.
an alert,
Right.
it is invaluable.
Or God forbid you make a mistake.
Right.
And you think you have everything in place and you've made.
And you did it wrong.
You did
right.
it all wrong.
The truth is, in New Jersey, there are technicalities to how you can sign a will,
Sure.
right? And we've all heard stories of famous people. I think it was just Aretha Franklin who they found what was deemed to be her will under a couch cushion.
Is that right?
Right. And then they found another one in a locked cabinet, and they had to have a court battle to get one admitted. And neither of them was done with an attorney. So you're talking a multimillionaire, and why she wouldn't have hired an attorney is beyond me. But, some people, I think, for what you addressed before, are spooked by the idea of dressing these things, right?
Yeah.
So it happens over and over and over again. But I think the peace of mind that can come from knowing that you did it right is invaluable.
Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, you're trying to do what's best and you're trying to do things right.
Right.
So why would you last moment take a shortcut and just say, well, I could do this on my own?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Mary Joan, this is all very helpful. I appreciate you taking the time and talking to us today. If you're interested in talking to Mary Joan about preparing an estate plan, you can reach her at 973-622-8405 or mkennedy@sabre.com. That's MKENNEDY@SAIBER.com. Thank you for everybody who's listening. Thank you for Mary Joan. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and our podcast channel, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.